Welcome to this Conveyancing Matters chat when we talk to Ewan Treadgold about the SQE. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
So welcome to another episode of Conveyancing Matters. We've got an old friend with us today. Ewan, how are you?
Very well indeed, mate. Very well. Usual stuff. Busy, under the cosh, pressured, but that's just day in the life of a conveyancing lawyer, I think, at the moment.
Everyday life. And Lorraine, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Stu. I'm good, thanks. I'm really delighted to welcome Ewan back. We're going to talk to you, Ewan, today about the Solicitors Qualifying Examination. The last time we saw you, you were embarking on the qualification or thinking about it, and we thought it would be really helpful for people who are either on the SQE or thinking about going onto the SQE to maybe follow someone's journey through the course, which is what we're going to talk about. But first and most importantly, Ewan, did you enjoy Conveyancing Matters Live?
I did indeed, yes. It is unusual to attend a CPD event that also involves alcohol, so it was a welcome relief as far as I'm concerned. Very different from, like I say, a lot of the CPD stuff, but you get all the CPD things and you get to have a beer afterwards. So I'm all for that. We need more of it in the industry as far as I'm concerned.
Want more beer?
Yeah.
Hey, you and I can promise you faithfully, mate, if it's something that's working, I promise you other people will nick the idea and start doing it. That's my prediction. I promise you faithfully.
Yeah. So as a consumer of CPD events, that would be great for me. So yeah.
But as the pioneers of that event, it would be a bit rubbish for me too. But there we go. Let's just put a marker down.
Yeah. Well, I'll still attend your one, so it's all good. We're all good.
Well, actually, some chappie said something about, a colleague and I did something, and my colleague called it Conveyancing Matters, as in Conveyancing Matters. I said, "Oh, did she really?"
Wonder where she got that idea.
Would you like to meet my friend? He's a trademark lawyer, and he's doing some trademark work for us on Conveyancing Matters in the name. And he went, "Oh." Markers in the sand. But anyway, Ewan, so just for the, two people in a cupboard who, don't realise what the SQE is, the SQE is now the SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authority's sort of, brand new world into how to qualify as a solicitor. And essentially, instead of doing the legal practice course, which is, in transition and being phased out, we've now got the SQE, which is a very, very different beast indeed. And the SQE is divided essentially into two sort of large bank of assessments. We've got SQE 1, which is where you're at, I think, at the moment, Ewan, and it's a bunch of 180 multiple choice questions. That's the assessment across 2 exam papers. Yep. And then if you pass SQE 1, you then go on to SQE 2, which is a whole load of skills assessments, which assesses a number of different skills across about 6 or 7 different practice areas. So that's kind of where we're going. But when we first met you and talked to you about this, you were sort of contemplating embarking on the SQE. So where are you at with it now, matey? And maybe just remind our viewers a little bit about your background and crucially, I think, as a SILEX qualified lawyer, why you're even thinking of doing the SQE.
I ask myself the same question every day, mate. Yeah. Like I said, I qualified in SILEX 4 years ago now, really, didn't really consider doing anything else at the time. I just thought that's it, that's done, and we'll sort of move on and just continue being a fellow of SILEX. But the opportunity sort of came up, and I think it's one of your lines, Lorraine, which is when someone offers you a training course and they offer to fund it, you always take it. Yeah, and that's what work offered. Work offered a funded training course, and I said, I'll have that. Yeah, so that's really why I've ended up doing it. I sort of wanted to move out of conveyancing and into property litigation, and felt like I needed a further qualification to do it. So that's part of the reason why. SQE had just come in. The firm are quite keen to sort of be pushing SQE for their new trainees and things. So they'll still take on LPC people, and we've still got plenty of people who've done the LPC, but I was keen to to explore the SQE and sort of qualify as a solicitor instead of continuing my qualification through Silex. So that's sort of the key reason, I guess, why I did it. Having, like I said, when I was here last time, I was speaking about maybe trying to do a course in person, trying to and not favouring online. But when it came to the crunch and June rolled round, the course that I had enrolled on wasn't running due to sort of the lack of people wanting in-person courses. So I opted for the online one in the end, and I'm halfway through that now. Exam is, or just over halfway. Exam is at the end of January. We've got 2 exams. I think they're 2 5.5-hour exams, something like that. One on a Friday, one on a Monday. So I get a weekend to additional study. And I mean, it's funny. I was listening. There was a comedian I was listening to the other day who, before she went into comedy, went into law, one of the big city sort of universities, and said, I decided not to pursue law because it was very boring and very difficult, and she didn't feel that was a fair combination. And I feel a bit like that on the SQE sometimes. It is incredibly difficult. The things that I loved about law at academic sort of undergraduate level, they're not anywhere near as existent in I would say in the SQE. The SQE is very much process. Your dispute resolution stuff is much more process driven than it is law driven. There are some law elements to it, but they're pulling a bit on your undergraduate stuff that you've already done. So it is it's tough, I think, and I think people need to think about that before they embark on it. It is really difficult. The one saving grace being that when you sit in the exam, you can always put an answer to the question, since they're all single best answer multiple choice questions. So no, it is very difficult. I think it's very difficult for me, having a child running a caseload. Don't think that this is something you can just sort of sit in the background. It's probably 10 to 20 hours or something a week that you've got to be putting into it. The course I'm doing is a part-time online course, and it's intense. There's a lot of stuff being thrown at you all the time, a lot of reading to do, and at the moment a bit worried about the exam in January, but luckily I've got January off work, so yeah.
Well, you've got no excuse then, mate, really. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what a lot of people don't realise about the SQ. I mean, I'm involved, on the other side in that, I've helped a couple of providers sort of put their courses and materials together, and now I'm kind of delivering some content and supporting students on and so on. And I think you're absolutely right about the balancing, work and this, even if you're on a part-time course. I don't think people quite realise, even though they're probably fairly heavily advised by the providers that they talk to, I don't think people quite realise how intense it is to put all of that study in together with a full-time job and life and everything else. Because Stu, how do most of your staff because I know you've got your training academy, how do most of your staff study and combine their work at the moment? And there's
it's basically the same. It's all done remotely, and you must have incredible discipline to fit that in around work, because of course, as we know, conveyancing particularly is no longer a 9-to-5 job, is it? You're forever sort of peaks and troughs of staying late and so on, and the discipline you must have to cut that line, otherwise it must overrun, and physically you must run out of time otherwise. Simple as that.
Yeah, and it's there were times when you think, I'll put an out of office on for an afternoon and do some study, and your inbox just ping, and you go, that's stuff that needs to be dealt with now, or we're in real trouble as a firm, so I better stop the study. And so finding that time, I think, if you are fun enough, I think our trainees, not that they find it easy, but I think they perhaps find, being a trainee and studying alongside it, they find their time can be balanced a bit better, because they're not, for me, I'm running a caseload of residential conveyancing files, where I am the fee earner on it, and the decisions have to be made by me on those cases, and that doesn't stop. So finding that time, and conveyancing isn't the sort of thing where people are all right with a 24-hour kind of turnaround on the response. They want, you know, they're phoning you at midday if you haven't had a response from the email at 9 o'clock this morning. So I just find that's quite a difficult thing to balance, and something you really need to consider, I think, if you're like me as a qualified sort of fellow running fee earning sort of caseload and then trying to study at the same time for an exam. I think is a really difficult thing to manage and to balance properly as well.
I think that's also, I think the student's discipline point is actually really important, because I think a lot of the online course providers have obviously a fairly sort of similar model, in that they will, you know, break the course down into various component parts, and students will be given a timetable and they'll study those component parts, and then, you know, probably have some input from you know, on the course, whatever that may be, whether it's an online lecture and or you know, an online sort of tutorial supervision type scenario where you will required to sort of turn up for an hour. But I think the discipline is a really important point there, actually, because I don't know about you, Ewan, but what I find with the online teaching sessions, as I say, whatever form they take, I certainly find that students either think of those as being optional to some degree, or they think, I'm under the pressure, you know, I've got childcare, I've got work, that's the bit that I can leave out. Or they and you and I have both experienced this, they sort of turn up, but that, you know, they're there in body, but that's about it, because they've got their mic off, they've got the camera off. I'm looking at, you know, 12 black screens. So whilst they might turn up, there's no actual real practical engagement. And I think you certainly, when we were talking off air, you know, felt that was a really significant contrast between doing the course online and in person, as you've studied before.
Yeah, certainly. I think you forget the things, you know, when I think back to university, a lot of our time was sitting in a lecture for sort of 2 hours. You'd then have an hour or so's break and you go on to a seminar. Yeah, and in that interim period, you'd go and perhaps, I don't know, chat with people at a coffee shop, or, you know, discuss the material that you've just learned in your lecture, or just chat crap about, you know, engaging with people. You don't.
We've got 92 YouTube videos under our belt where we do that.
But that's the sort of stuff that you miss, I think, from an online course. So, you know, the one that I'm doing is University of Law, and it is great. They've set it out really well. I think it's quite different to some of the other providers that are available, and it doesn't follow in the same way the classic sort of university structure of 2-hour lecture or something on a subject, 1 hour, 2-hour seminar on a subject. You know, you'll get a unit, it might be something like disclosure, and then you will you'll have a sort of a series of questions that are sort of quite like sort of prepare questions, then engage questions, then consolidate questions. So it involves being at your computer quite a lot, as well as doing some sort of pre-reading on it as well. And then the questions that they're asking are quite similar to things you might have found in a seminar at university. They'll be based on that, either the law material, or they'll be based on the sort of practice material that you get given as well by university. They're great. One thing I would love to have seen more was, I'd love to have seen the interface that you actually, because you're at your computer all the time, if you've got quite a clunky and difficult sort of interface, something that's a bit difficult to navigate, I think you know, that might have swayed my decision to a different provider. So they're imperfect, I think, these online courses. For me, I'd love to just have 2 hours sitting there listening to a lecture outside of my house, because I could just say to both my partner and my child, I am not here for the next 3 hours, bye, and say to work as well. And to then be able to say it to your clients.
I think probably post-pandemic, you know, the idea of in-person has become something of a luxury. It's become something of an expensive luxury, isn't it? I mean, Stu, as a sort of slightly separate point, but, you know, when you and I were sort of first thinking about doing Conveyancing Matters CPD, one of the issues was, you know, well, would anybody want to come to a face-to-face thing anymore?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, nowadays, probably 50% of the meetings I have are all done over Zoom or, you know, Team or whatever the sort of entity you want to use. So, you know, I think there is a bit of a lack of sort of want to meet up. I don't know whether that will change in the coming years, who knows, but I think we have been conditioned, haven't we, now to learning, to working, and a bit of way of life like this.
I also think for firms, and to sort of feed into to Ewan's side of the equation, I think for firms actually now that they've realised that so much of this training can be online, I've certainly experienced, whether it's SQE, CPD, it doesn't actually matter, the principle's the same. Just a general unwillingness to let people have the time out the office, to now pay the travel, all of those associated costs, because apart from an hour and a half out of the office, during the working day, that might be it. If someone's got an online session at 10 in the morning, well, they'll just sit at their desk and they'll be working again by 11:35.
And too often, I think people are working during them. I think that's the other trouble with some of the online courses is the reason why you're probably seeing your black screens when you sit them is that people are sitting there going, I'll just do a few emails, so I'm doing this. And are you actually engaging with material at that point? Is there enough engagement from the students, whether it be CPD or SQE? Are you actually learning it in the same way? I mean, I remember our lecture hall at university, there was no phone signal. So you all you could do was watch the lecture if you were sat in there. I'm
absolutely all for that. I'm all for just locking people into a room and make them listen to me, quite frankly. But that's probably a totally different thing, you and I have to.
That's an issue. That's not.
To be fair, mate, I think that's one I've got to work through, if I'm really honest. But I do think the engagement, I think, is a massive point, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think anybody who is thinking of embarking on the SQE, and they're most likely, and you've done the analysis on this, Ewan, is it fair to say that most will be online or have a significant online element? I can't imagine how many, I don't know how many providers there are, I've not bothered to look, but it's the biggest choice online now rather than any element of face-to-face.
So I mean, what I found was everywhere is offering you an online course. I mean, there's a number of providers that are only online, but I've found that the vast majority will offer you an online option. There's very few that you go to, or I couldn't find any that you went to and said, we only do it in person. Everyone is doing online. And what I found was there's not as much uptake for the in-person as there is for the online, it seemed as well. People are really sort of pushing, and perhaps the consumer of legal education is perhaps I've become a Luddite already. Perhaps that's the problem. I want to go and sit in a lecture hall, and people are going, yeah, but it's 2022, mate. You need to. It's not 2005 anymore.
Well, but one thing I would urge, and I'm, if you're a Luddite, well, God knows what I am, but one of the things, the things I think anybody thinking of embarking on this really needs to consider is that, and I would say it, wouldn't I, because I'm a trainer, but the engagement is essential, because actually, particularly for SQE1, I think one of the major stumbling blocks actually is the technique of doing 185 choice MCQs in 2 days, as you say, and however much law and practice you think in terms of principle, a huge amount of the preparation is actually about preparing you for the technique of taking 180 MCQs, and a lot of them are, and people don't realise this when they embark on the course, a lot of them are best answer MCQs. So they're along the lines of, which of the following statements best describes what the solicitor should do? So a big shock for people is that you haven't got 5 choices, 4 of which are wrong. You've got 5 choices,
3 which are right, and one is more right than the other 3. Yeah,
exactly. So 2 or 3 of which are all completely plausible and technically correct, but your challenge in 1 minute 40 seconds, because that's how long you've got per MCQ question, is to choose the best answer. And that's the challenge. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. But certainly people looking to source a provider, I think, should be thinking about
exam technique as much as content.
Asking the providers, well, okay, what preparation do you give us in terms of setting
and
these MCQs?
It is difficult, I think. The last exams I sat were in an exam hall, essay written. You'd get questions, you would you'll have revised 8 of the 12 topics or whatever it is that they're there, and cross your fingers and hope they all come up. And then you write an essay about it. And you can work around a subject. You can get a bit of extra credit if you can work something in there from your knowledge, and you might get some extra credit. You do not get that with the SQE exam. It is a right or wrong answer. And like I say, the advantage is you can have a crack at it, but the disadvantage is if they're not going to give you any credit for, like, yeah, you got one of the correct ones, but it wasn't the best answer. You don't get any credit at that point.
You get 0 marks. So Stu, when your colleagues and the people that PCS put through training courses, do you offer any sort of support or additional sort of encouragement for people? Because I think a lot of people are going to struggle on the SQE just with, well, isolation's a bit dramatic, but do you offer anything or give any advice on how to, get through it and additional support, that sort of thing, Stu?
We do, yeah. We have what we call a technical support department that will hopefully guide some of the guys through what they have to go through. I think just going back to some of the points we were making earlier, I think a lot of the younger generation are conditioned to learning in this manner, though. I think my son, certainly, he's at university, 90% of what he does is all online now. Even though he's at university, the actual sort of lectures that he takes are still online. I think even in schools now, isn't it? It's virtually every school kid has to have a laptop or an iPad, and that's the way people learn. So I think people are conditioned to doing it this way now. So maybe lectures in person will become a thing of the past.
Yeah, and it's got its advantages. If you can make it work, and it probably comes back to the point you made earlier, Stu, about that discipline. It's like, can you be disciplined enough to switch yourself off from your life for 2.5 hours in your own house? I mean, I'm not great at it. I'm learning quickly because I've got to, but I am not brilliant at doing it. I'm not brilliant at sitting at my desk and doing it in the office. I'm slightly better at doing it at home. Either way, it is that is the next challenge.
You need to have a support network around you, don't you, and complete understanding. I mean, within the office, we have somebody that's completely allocated to the guys that are doing the training, that looks after them, that has the full knowledge. I mean, it wouldn't be myself, I wouldn't have a clue what goes on in the exams these days. But one of the other partners is completely au fait, regularly speaks to the CLC and knows what goes on in these courses. And I think, that support network has to be there, especially even more so, when it's sort of, remote and people already have caseloads like we discussed earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just thinking about that as well with support, like support networks, is the amount that my partner's had to pick up childcare or pick up just our lives at home, that I would perhaps have engaged with a bit more, and I've said I've got to do 6 hours of this, and she's been very good, luckily, but don't underestimate how much you probably need those people if you're in my position where you've got family, mortgage, work life. If you're going to take on these sorts of courses, that how much you probably need that person who's at home with you to really sort of pick up the slack. And I
very
go for
much
my turn next year.
Yeah, it's a joint effort, isn't it? It's very much a family effort. If you've got, they've got to be on board with it, I think.
Yeah.
Without any doubt. And well, we were saying off air, Ewan, weren't we, about a lot of organisations offering the SQE, clearly do what they can to support their students. I find as a trainer, apart from anything else, it can be quite demoralising to look at a bunch of blank screens and that there's people behind them not listening to what you're saying. But actually in class, it can obviously be easier, assuming people turn up, for me to identify who's working, who's struggling, what people are understanding. It's easier to offer support to people who are struggling because you can more readily identify who they are. But as I say, a lot of organisations will set up, chat groups and WhatsApp groups and all the rest of it, which are great, but they can be dominated by somebody with the biggest voice or the fastest thumb sort of thing. And actually, I found that some students just aren't at all suited to that, because they find sort of listening to other people, it just becomes an echo chamber for the stresses of certain individuals who are within the group, or it becomes an echo chamber for their particular individual thing that they don't understand. And that becomes the dominant discussion point. And you actually get, I've found, students who, were perfectly happy and understood a point, sat in the WhatsApp group for 20 minutes and just were absolutely, scared to death because they thought, I don't understand it anymore. And actually they did. So again, that's not something that's good for everyone. But I mean, Stu, again, off air, Ewan and I were talking and sort of maybe widening the discussion out, you know, a little bit more before we close. We were thinking more generally about, you know, the regulation of the profession. And, you know, Ewan, you were saying that, you know, for you, as if you'd remained as a property lawyer, then sort of, you know, staying, you know, getting under the CLC banner would have seemed like a sensible move for you.
Yeah, certainly. I think that I think it seems like a really obvious choice. If you're sitting there in a conveyancing, in a firm that has conveyancing sort of at its heart, if it's something you're doing and that's your caseload, I think the CLC qualification seems like, for me, the obvious choice out of the, you know, if you look at the three main ones, which are Silex, CLC and Solicitor. CLC seems to really sort of have it, I would have said, it's been completely tailored, I guess, for that residential conveyancing. So absolutely, that seems like the qualification to have if that is what your caseload is. I think the advantage of perhaps things like being a solicitor is you get a broader training, which is good. It means you can, and if you've done if you're doing a training contract alongside it, you get the additional seats and things. So you can decide a different area of law. But if you're sitting there happy with residential conveyancing, that's what you want to do, then that's exactly what I would have considered if I'd decided to stay within that practice area.
So you would have actually considered, had you not been offered the prop lit chance which you've got now in your current role, you know, would you have thought about eventually moving from your Silex qualification to the licensed conveyancer qualification? Yeah,
certainly. I think it seems much better and much more tailored towards residential conveyancing, and it seems that with Silex you've got sort of additional. It feels like there's a lot more hoops, I guess, to jump through to be that conveyancing practitioner, which I don't have. Fun enough, I'm a fellow of Silex, but I don't have the conveyancing practitioner qualification. Whereas it feels like you could just go and do the CLC one, and you've got all the advantages of the conveyancing practitioner thing qualification that Silex has. So I was struggling to sort of see how Silex were differentiating themselves for a position within residential conveyancing at that moment. So I probably would have considered the CLC qualification over the Silex one.
Sorry, go on.
I think lots of things have changed as well, haven't they? If you go back, say, I don't know, when I first started 20 plus years ago, I think lawyers in general were, you know, more, or should I say, maybe the law was not as great in its scope. And what I mean by that is maybe as a conveyancer, you would dabble in other things. So you would touch on matrimonial issues if you're looking at a transfer of equity, for example. Whereas now, whether it be regulation, whether it be your indemnity insurer, whether it be the scope of the law just increasing in size, you know, you wouldn't go near it. You know, your remit is more clearly defined, maybe. And I suppose, you know, the word that particularly the CLC would use would be specialism. And, you know, if you are looking at residential conveyancing, it is a specialist regulator in that field, isn't it? So from a selling point, you know, that's surely what you'd look for. Yeah,
and I think property litigation probably would have been done by transactional lawyers. You know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and now it's an area within itself that is much more specialised, and you do need separate property litigators to take on those litigation elements. Whereas I think, like I say, I think many years ago, before I joined the profession, it would have been very different.
There's a number of examples, and that's again maybe wills and probate. You know, I can remember when I first started, all lawyers would quickly, you know, knock out a will for their conveyancing client. Whereas now, again, you know, I know the CLC has the additional bolt-on qualification in wills and probate, but I'm not sure, you know, as a percentage, how many licensed conveyancers would have that. Be interesting to know. But again, now it's become, I think, you know, the word risk, again, you know, we float that around so much, don't we? But yeah, dabbling in something you don't know.
I think if you're thinking to yourself, I'm dabbling, then you probably need to notify your own professional indemnity insurer. I'm just going to dabble in this one for you. Yes, okay.
Pick it up as I go along. I'll work it out. Oh, no, you won't. Well, look, yeah, we could probably chat away to you all day, lovely, but it's probably a good time to close the conversation. really delighted to welcome you back, and thanks for sharing your your views on the experience now having embarked on the online SQE with you, Law. As you say, the exam's at the end of January, so I wonder if we might catch up with you after that to
Yeah,
what you thought.
I was going to say exactly the same. So thank you for having me. It's been brilliant. And I was going to say exactly the same. Shall we try and do maybe sort of mid-February? That'll give me a week of drinking.
I think so. I think sounds like that's a point, Stu. We ought to be doing another.
Won't be remember any of it.
We ought to do one just for Ewan.
Yeah.
Immediately post-exam. Well, look, Ewan, thanks ever so much for joining us. Lovely. It's been a delight as ever. And well, Stu, I will see you very soon. And Ewan, as ever, if you have got any odd questions about MCQs, you know where to find me. I will. Yes, I will give you a call, probably in tears, mid-January. In about 20 minutes. All right, guys. Well, you take care now.
Okay, guys. Yeah.
Bye now.